Hello and welcome. Today we're looking at one of the giants of 20th century art, a name that pretty much everyone knows, Paul Jackson Pollock.
And when you hear that name, you probably get an immediate image in your head.
Right, the mad genius, maybe in a barn, flinging paint everywhere, a man fighting his demons. And while, there's some truth to that image.
It's really just the surface. It's the caricature. The reality is so much more complex and, frankly, more interesting.
Exactly. We're talking about a very deliberate technical evolution. We're talking about an artist deeply influenced by things like Mexican muralism, Native American culture, even Jungian psychology.
And then there's the whole afterlife of his work. It gets tangled up with, of all things, Cold War politics, fractal mathematics, and modern forensic science. It's a fascinating story.
It really is. We've got a whole range of sources here, from biographies and old critical reviews right from his lifetime, all the way to recent scientific papers on how to authenticate his paintings.
So what we want to do is get past that Jack the Dripper myth and really understand the facts. How did this young man from Cody, Wyoming, completely reinvent what painting could be?
And we also need to talk about the critical role of his wife, Lee Krasner, an artist in her own right, and someone who is often overlooked in this story.
Absolutely essential to his story. You could argue there would be no Jackson Pollock as we know him without her.
So let's start at the very beginning. Paul Jackson Pollock, born January 28, 1912, in Cody, Wyoming. He was the youngest of 5 boys.
And that Western identity is something that became part of his persona, his brand, later in New York. But the irony is he barely spent any time in Cody.
How long was he actually there?
The family left when he was only 10 months old, so he never really knew it. His childhood was defined by constant motion. His father, Leroy, was a farmer and then a government land surveyor.
So the family moved all the time.
All the time. Across Arizona, California, it was a very unstable, transient upbringing. And it's not hard to see how that might have contributed to the restlessness he was known for his whole life.
There are also some early signs that formal structures just weren't for him. He had trouble in school.
A lot of trouble. He was expelled from Manual Arts High School in Los Angeles. And that wasn't the first time. He'd been expelled from another high school back in 1928.
But during this period, he did have these experiences that would stick with him. He'd go with his father on those surveying trips.
And those trips are incredibly significant because that's where he was directly exposed to Native American cultures.
He wasn't just seeing artifacts in a museum.
No, not at all. He was out there seeing the cultures firsthand. And he later drew a direct line from that experience to his own methods. He talked about how his practice of painting on the floor was like the sand painting techniques he'd seen.
So it's not just an aesthetic influence, it's a procedural one. It's about the physical act of making art.
Precisely. He's absorbing this idea that you don't need an easel. That art can be created on a horizontal plane, on the ground, that you can be physically part of it. That's a seed planted very early on.
Okay, so in 1930, he makes a big move. He follows his older brother, Charles, to New York City.
Right. And they both enroll at the Art Students League, and they're studying under a very famous artist at the time, Thomas Hart Benton.
Benton's style is what they call regionalism. He painted these very heroic scenes of rural America. It seems like the complete opposite of where Pollock would end up.
Stylistically, yes, 1,000%. Pollock did not pick up Benton's subject matter at all. But what he did get from Benton was a couple of things. One was Benton's rhythmic use of paint, the way the compositions flowed. And the other was this idea of fierce independence, of being an American artist, not beholden to European traditions.
But if we're looking for the real technical key, the thing that unlocked the drip paintings, it wasn't Benton.
No. For that, you have to look at the Mexican muralists. Pollock was obsessed with them, especially Jose Clemente Orozco.
He saw Orozco's Fresco Prometheus and called it what?
The greatest painting in North America. He was just blown away by the scale, the power, the raw emotion of it.
And then came a very specific, crucial event in 1936. Pollock attends an experimental workshop in New York.
Yes, run by another one of the great Mexican muralists, David Alfaro Siqueiros. And this workshop, this is the moment. This is the turning point for his materials.
This is where he discovers liquid paint.
It's where he's introduced to it. Siqueiros was all about experimenting with industrial materials, and Pollock starts working with synthetic resin-based paints, specifically alkyd enamels.
So, house paint.
Essentially, yes. Not the thick oil paint that comes out of an artist's tube. This was fluid. You could pour it, drip it, splash it, fling it. He's learning this in 1936, more than 10 years before his famous drip period. The seed was planted. He realized paint could be a liquid force, not just a paste you push around with a brush.
At the same time, all this is happening. His personal life is very turbulent. He was struggling with alcoholism even then.
Very much so. And this led him into therapy. From 1938 to 1941, he was in Jungian psychotherapy with a Dr. Joseph Henderson.
And this wasn't just talk therapy. It had a direct connection to his art.
A direct connection. Henderson actually encouraged Pollock to create drawings as part of the therapeutic process. They would analyze them together.
So he's drawing these Jungian concepts, archetypes.
Exactly. And it pushes his art inward. It becomes about the subconscious, the symbolic. This is a huge step away from painting what you see in the world and toward painting what you feel inside.
Some modern psychiatrists have looked back at his life, his behavior, his cycles of intense productivity and then crippling depression, and have suggested he might have had bipolar disorder.
It's a hypothesis, yes.
Yeah.
It's impossible to diagnose posthumously, of course, but his behavior patterns are certainly consistent with that.
During this difficult period, he did have some support. He was working for the WPA, the Federal Art Project.
Which was a lifeline for so many artists during the Depression. It gave him a small, steady income while he was trying to figure out his art and, well, himself.
But the real career breakthrough, the moment that changes everything, comes in 1943. And it involves a legendary name in the art world, Peggy Guggenheim.
Peggy Guggenheim was one of the most important collectors and gallerists of the 20th century, and she saw something in Pollock's work. In July of 43, she signs him to a contract.
And not just a contract, she gives him a massive commission.
A huge one. She wanted a painting to cover an entire wall in the entryway of her new townhouse. The final piece was enormous, 8 feet by 20 feet. It's just called Mural.
And there's a great little story about some advice he got from Marcel Duchamp.
Yes. The original idea was to paint it directly on the wall as a true mural. But Duchamp, ever the pragmatist, suggested he paint it on a canvas instead.
So it would be portable.
Exactly. Which turned out to be brilliant advice because the work has traveled the world. When the great critic Clement Greenberg saw Mural, he had this immediate, profound reaction.
What did he see?
He wrote, "I took one look at it and I thought, now that's great art, and I knew Jackson was the greatest painter this country had produced."
That's an incredible endorsement.
It was career-making. Greenberg's support was absolutely instrumental in putting Pollock on the map. The critics at the time described the work as, volcanic, undisciplined. They didn't quite know what to make of it, but they knew it was powerful.
Right around this same time, another person enters his life. And it's impossible to overstate her importance. Lee Krasner.
Lee Krasner, a fantastic artist herself, and the person who would become the anchor of Pollock's life and career.
How did they meet?
They met in 1942. They were in the same group show. Krasner was already well established in the New York art scene, and she was intrigued by his work. So intrigued, in fact, that she went to his apartment unannounced, just to see more of it.
They married in October of 1945. And then they made another big move.
A very big move. They left New York City and relocated out to Springs in East Hampton on Long Island. They bought a farmhouse there with a loan from Peggy Guggenheim.
And it's there that Pollock finds the space he needs. He converts the barn into his studio.
That barn is ground zero. It's the laboratory where the drip technique is perfected. But we have to talk more about Krasner's role in all this. It was so much more than just being his wife.
There's a very pointed quote from the painter Fritz Boltmann. He called Pollock her creation, her Frankenstein. That's a very strong statement.
It's incredibly strong, but there's a kernel of truth there that historians, especially feminist art historians, have really unpacked. Krasner was formally trained in a way Pollock wasn't. She understood the tenets of European modernism inside and out.
So she was his guide, in a way.
She was his guide, his editor, his one trusted critic. She helped him organize his ideas to channel that raw talent into a more cosmopolitan and coherent style. She was the one who introduced him to important collectors, to critics, to the people who could make his career.
The dealer, John Bernard Myers, put it even more bluntly.
He said, "There would never have been a Jackson Pollock without a Lee Pollock." And I think most historians would agree with that today. She managed his entire professional life so that he could be free to create in that barn.
So that brings us to the famous drip period. We're talking about the years from roughly 1947 to 1950.
This is his peak. This is when everything comes together. He completely abandons the easel. The canvas is on the floor.
And he's not using traditional brushes?
No. He's using hardened brushes, sticks, even basting syringes, anything he could use to drip and pour the paint. The key is that he's often not physically touching the surface of the canvas at all. He's working above it, letting gravity and motion do the work.
He had a famous quote about this process. He said, "On the floor, I am more at ease. I feel nearer, more part of the painting."
Since this way I can walk around it, work from the four sides, and literally be in the painting.
That idea of being in the painting is so important.
It's the whole philosophy. This is what the critic Harold Rosenberg would later call action painting. The canvas isn't a window onto another world anymore. It's not a picture of something. It's an arena. It's the event itself. The painting is the physical record of his actions, of his dance around the canvas.
And he was very insistent that it wasn't just random. He hated the idea of accidents.
Vehemently. He believed he was in complete control of the flow of the paint. It was this complex synthesis of the paint's own viscosity, the force of gravity, and the gestures and movements of his own body.
And we should also give credit to another artist here, someone who was using a similar technique a bit earlier, Janet Sobel.
Yes, that's a really important piece of the story. Janet Sobel was a Ukrainian-American artist, and Pollock saw her work at a gallery in 1946. Clement Greenberg himself pointed to her as a direct influence on the drip technique.
And Pollock admitted it.
He did. He said her work made an impression. So the idea was sort of in the air. You also had influences from surrealism, from automatism, from artists like Wolfgang Palin. But Pollock took this idea and just exploded it. He took it to a scale and an intensity no one had ever seen.
Creating this new style called all-over painting.
Exactly. There's no center, no focal point, no foreground or background. Your eye's forced to constantly move across the surface. There's no single place for it to rest.
And to make sure people weren't, looking for a hidden face or a landscape in the swirls of paint, he changed how he titled his works.
He did. He abandoned descriptive titles and started just using numbers. Number 5, 1948. Number 17A.
Because numbers are neutral.
They're completely neutral. He said he wanted people to look passively and try to receive what the painting has to offer and not get bogged down trying to find some recognizable subject matter that wasn't there.
This radical new way of painting brought him an enormous amount of attention. And then, in August 1949, came the big one, Life magazine.
That was the moment he went from being a famous artist in the art world to being a household name across America. A huge multi-page spread with the headline, Jackson Pollock, is he the greatest living painter in the United States?
That's a provocative question to put in front of millions of people.
It catapulted him to a new level of celebrity. And not long after, Time magazine gave him the nickname that would stick forever, Jack the Dripper.
But that level of fame, it seems it was a double-edged sword for him.
It really was. And this is where we start to see the beginning of the decline. And many people point to one specific event in 1950 involving the photographer Hans Nemeth.
Nemeth wanted to photograph and film Pollock in the act of painting.
And he did. He set up his camera in the Barnes studio. And his photos and film are now iconic. Nemeth described the process as this intense, silent, frenetic dance.
But for Pollock, it was different, having the camera there being watched.
It broke the spell. It made him self-conscious. He was no longer just in the painting. He was performing the act of painting for an audience. He famously told Nemeth after one session, the painting was finished, the magic was gone.
And reports say that right after that session, he went straight back to drinking, ending a 2-year period of sobriety.
It seems to have been a major psychological trigger, and his work began to change right after that, too. In 1951, he produced a new series, The Black Pourings.
What were these like?
They were a radical departure. He abandoned the vibrant color of the drip paintings. He was working only in black enamel, often on unprimed, raw canvas. And he started to let figures, or at least hints of figures, back into the work.
It sounds like he was searching for something new.
I think he was, trying to find a new path, maybe balancing that pure abstraction with some kind of representation. But from a commercial standpoint, they were a disaster.
They didn't sell.
Not a single one sold from his show at the Betty Parsons Gallery. The market wanted the colorful drips, and this was something else. Darker, more challenging.
He then switched to a more commercially minded gallery, Sidney Janis.
Oh.
But the pressure just kept building.
It did. The pressure to produce, to repeat his success. His alcoholism got much worse. And by 1956, he had stopped painting entirely.
Not at all.
No paintings in 1956. He was making some sculptures out of wire and gauze at a friend's house, but the painting had stopped.
And his personal life was in a similar state of collapse.
It was. His marriage to Lee Krasner was falling apart because of the drinking and his infidelity. He was having an affair with a young artist named Ruth Kligman. In the summer of that year, Krasner decided she needed a break and went to Europe.
Which brings us to the night of August 11th, 1956.
Yes. Pollock was driving his Oldsmobile convertible. He was extremely drunk. With him in the car were Ruth Kligman and her friend Edith Metzger.
And he crashed the car?
Less than a mile from his home, he lost control and the car flipped. Pollock was killed instantly. He was 44 years old.
Edith Metzger was also killed.
Yes. Ruth Kligman was the only survivor.
It's just such a violent, tragic end. But in a strange way, it almost sealed his mythic status.
It did. The troubled genius who burned out. He was buried in Green River Cemetery in Springs with a large boulder from his own property serving as a headstone.
After his death, his legacy and the value of his work enter a whole new stratosphere. And Lee Krasner is now the sole manager of his entire estate.
And she did an absolutely masterful job. She navigated the art world with incredible skill, ensuring his reputation not only survived but grew, even as new trends like pop art were taking over. She controlled the inventory, managed exhibitions, and solidified his place in history.
And the prices for his paintings just started to climb.
And climb.
They skyrocketed. A key moment was in 1973 when the Australian government bought his painting Blue Poles, which is number 11, 1952.
And they paid what for it?
$2 million US. At the time, it was an absolute world record for an American painting, and it caused a massive political scandal in Australia. People were outraged.
But it cemented the painting's fame.
It made it one of the most famous paintings in the world, and the values just kept going up. In 2006, number 5, 1948, was reportedly sold for $140 million. Then in 2016, number 17A sold for $200 million.
It's just incredible. But beyond the art market, there's this other, much stranger dimension to his legacy, something we mentioned at the start, the CIA. Right. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's well-documented history. How does an abstract painter become, as one writer put it, a weapon of the Cold War?
So what was the thinking there? Why would the Central Intelligence Agency be interested in promoting Jackson Pollock?
It was all about cultural warfare. The Soviet Union was heavily promoting its official art style, which was called socialist realism.
Which was very rigid representational art. Heroic workers, glorious leaders.
Exactly. It was propaganda. So the U.S. wanted a cultural counteroffensive. They wanted to show the world, especially intellectual circles in Europe, that America was the center of creativity, freedom, and innovation.
And Pollock's art was the perfect symbol for that.
The perfect symbol. It was big, it was bold, it was individualistic, it looked like total freedom, maybe even anarchy. It was everything socialist realism was not. So an organization called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was later revealed to be a CIA front, secretly sponsored international exhibitions of Pollock's work and other abstract expressionists.
So they were using his art as a form of propaganda for American freedom and individualism.
That's precisely what they were doing. It was cultural diplomacy as a tool of statecraft.
And his influence also spreads into pop culture in a big way. There's the biopic, Pollock, with Ed Harris.
A fantastic film. And Harris did all the painting himself, which is amazing. You also see his work pop up in other movies like The Accountant.
And there's a really interesting reference in the sci-fi film Ex Machina. A character uses Pollock to describe the state of an advanced AI.
Yes, he describes its thinking as being in a state between deliberate and random, which is such an astute observation, and it leads us directly into the scientific analysis of his work.
This is where things get really fascinating. In 1999, a physicist named Richard Taylor decides to analyze Pollock's paintings with a computer.
Right. He scans the paintings and uses fractal analysis to study the patterns.
And for those of us who aren't physicists, what exactly are fractals?
Fractals are complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. So the pattern you see in a tiny section looks basically the same as the pattern of the whole. You see them everywhere in nature, in coastlines, in snowflakes, in the branching of trees.
And Taylor found these patterns in Pollock's drips.
He did. He found a clear fractal signature. He even coined a term for it, fractal expressionism. And what's more, he found that the fractal complexity of Pollock's paintings actually increased systematically over the years of the drip period.
So it wasn't random chaos. There was a hidden mathematical order to it.
A very specific order, one that mimics the geometry of the natural world. It connects right back to Pollock's famous quote when someone asked him if he worked from nature. He said, "I am nature."
And there have even been studies showing that looking at these fractal patterns can have a calming effect.
Yes, cognitive neuroscientists have found that viewing these specific types of fractals can reduce a person's physiological stress levels. It's really incredible.
And this scientific analysis has found a very practical application.
Yeah.
Authentication.
A huge application, because faking a Pollock is a big business. You'd think it would be easy, just splash some paint around, but it's not.
The Pollock Krasner Foundation, which manages the estate, actually stopped authenticating works for a while because it was just getting too messy legally.
Exactly. But this fractal analysis has been used as a tool. It can distinguish between a genuine Pollock fractal and a random non-fractal splatter with a recorded success rate of 93 to 99%.
Let's talk about a real-world case. The Wainscott Locker find from 2003.
Right. A trove of 24 paintings that looked very much like Pollock's were discovered in a storage locker on Long Island. It was a huge potential discovery.
So they ran the fractal analysis.
They did, but they also did something more definitive: pigment analysis. Researchers at Harvard analyzed the paint used in these disputed works.
And what did they find?
They found synthetic pigments that were not patented, not commercially available until the 1980s.
Decades after Pollock died in 1956.
Case closed. It was scientifically impossible for him to have painted them. A similar thing happened in the big Noodler Gallery scandal. A supposed Pollock called Untitled 1950 was sold for $17 million.
And the paint was too new.
The paint contained a yellow pigment that wasn't available until 1970.
Then there's the story of Terry Horton, the truck driver who bought a painting at a thrift store for $5.
That became the documentary, Who the #Taper Sent is Jackson Pollock. That case was much murkier. An art expert pointed out it was on primed canvas, which Pollock rarely used for his drip works. They tried to match a fingerprint found on the back of the canvas, but the results were inconclusive. It just shows how incredibly difficult and contentious authentication can be.
It's really the ultimate irony, isn't it? An artist whose work looks to most people like pure, uncontrolled chaos. And it turns out to be so mathematically structured that you need a computer to verify it.
It is the central paradox of his work. He completely liberated the painted line from its traditional job of describing an object. He changed the whole physical relationship between the artist and the artwork.
And in doing so, he accidentally, or maybe intuitively, tapped into the fundamental geometry of the natural world.
Precisely. The artist who tried to escape structure ended up creating works that perfectly mirror the hidden structures of nature. And it's a legacy that was carefully protected and preserved by Lee Krasner, allowing it to survive and allowing us to have these conversations today.
From a kid expelled from high school in California to the toast of the New York art world, to a pawn in the Cold War, and finally a subject of fractal analysis. It's an incredible American story.
It really is a complete picture of an artist who was so much more than the myth.
Thanks for listening.